I'm Maureen Ballatori, and this is Spilled Salt, a podcast on the thrills and spills from the food, beverage, and agriculture industries. Today's guests are Lachlan Campbell, co-founder and CEO of ProAgni, and Warren Lee, ProAgni's commercial director. ProAgni is an ag biotech company commercializing rumen microbiome research. Their pioneering products focus on reducing methane emissions and enabling the removal of antibiotics from ruminant production without cost or productivity implications. And that last bit is a big part of our conversation today. The fact that their core product, which is called Protect, you'll hear them reference that in today's conversations a few times, does not increase the cost of feed to the farmer, and actually, in some cases, can reduce it because of the efficiency from consumption. ProAgni won $1 million in the Grow New York startup competition in 2022. Grow New York is a food and ag tech startup competition focused on enhancing the emerging food, beverage, and agriculture innovation cluster in upstate New York. I'm delighted to have Warren and Lachlan join me on the podcast today, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Wonderful. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited to have both of you here. And so we don't typically have two guests at once on the podcast. And so for all the listeners, I told Lachlan and Warren that I've practiced herding some cats before today's episode so that we can keep everybody on track. But it's going to be a great episode.
And we're pretty much house trained. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Oh, good.
We are so not house trained. We've interrupted you twice.
It's going to make for a lively show. I love it. I always like to start with a little bit of background because I'm a big believer in everything that came before what you're doing now is, of course, impacting your current work. And so why don't we have you start, Warren, and just talk a little bit about your background leading up to the work that you're doing at ProAgni, and then Lachlan will have you do the same.
Yeah, sure. I'm Warren Lee, ProAgni's commercial director. I'm one of the only people initially involved in the business who had no background in agriculture at all. My background is in mergers and acquisitions law and investment banking. And then I went out from that and started running businesses and starting businesses. So a bit of kind of startup, operational and management expertise as well. It's been super interesting coming into a very agriculturally focused business where we try, obsessively to put the farmer at the center of everything that we do. And, as the guy who 5 or 6 years ago didn't know the difference between a cow and a sheep, I know that now. That's been a great journey.
What's one of the most surprising things for you in terms of a discovery about agriculture?
I think I probably came with some inbuilt bias that, farms were kind of production systems, and a lot of farmers were really indifferent to the environmental impact of what they do. And I think that was completely 100% wrong. I mean, they're often intergenerational businesses, and the health of that business going forward is based on productivity of the land and land management and animal management and everything else. And, they care deeply about that. Maybe not exactly the same way as the kind of, black skivvy wearing hipster does, but they care really deeply.
Yeah, right. They might not talk about it in the same way, but they certainly know that it's the life or death of their business, for them to have to care about the land and sustainability for the long term.
And they take a multi-generational approach to that because often their greatest ambition is to pass the business on to their kids. So, it's not just a milk it while I'm alive thing.
Right. Yep. And how about you, Lachlan? I know that you do have the background in farming, so complete opposite from Warren, but talk a little bit about your background before ProAgni.
Well, I am the farmer in this conversation. Fifth generation. I live in rural New South Wales. So for your listeners, I'm about 350 miles west of Sydney. It's an 18,000 acre ranch, sheep and cattle, and 2 feed yards. And so my background is actually in agricultural consultancy. I did 18 years in particular succession. So the relevancy of this story is the relevancy of choice. Being able to hand that farm down is probably one of the most challenging things that farmers face. And to do it with either debt or to leave the generation handing it down with some freedom is probably the hardest thing you see. So if we're not making farmers money, it hurts personally.
Right. Speaking of the life and death of the business, is right from a different perspective of what we were just talking about with Warren. But so Lach, it was, what is on the 18,000 acre ranch?
Well, there's a bunch of sheep, around about 10,000. There's around about 10,000 cattle and around about 15,000 kangaroos. So it's the kangaroos that really are the genesis of this story, Maureen. And just by way of background, my brother and I are still in partnership. So it's my brother that does all the farming. He has done for the better part of the relationship, and particularly since I left farming to move to ProAgni. So back to the kangaroos. The genesis of this story is really around an extraordinary animal that sits in our paddocks and lives a pretty unique life because they don't burp methane. And my sheep and cattle do. Now, that has a profound impact on your ability to thrive in what is traditionally a very dry, seasonal environment. So we get very long droughts, and when we do get breaks, it breaks quite significantly. We have a 24-inch rainfall, but that can double. And those droughts can last upwards of 18 months. Now, those animals, so we talk about a thing called a feed conversion ratio. A feed conversion ratio, in my world, is the ability to convert grass to protein or red meat. And that feed conversion ratio represents 6 to 1. So that's 6 pounds of grass to put on 1 pound of red meat, live weight. Now, that's basically what kangaroos do. So they sit there day in, day out, in the middle of a drought, under a tree, pretty relaxed, while my sheep and cattle are doing around about 20 to 1. So that's a really inefficient animal struggling to survive in that environment. So ProAgni basically asked themselves, you know what? If we could turn cattle into kangaroos, what would the world look like? You've got less methane, better resource use, and at the end of the day, animals that can survive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth and make farmers more money. So that's the background. That's the background thinking, but it's a much deeper and much more scientific story than that.
Right. And so before we get into the science of it, which I want to touch on briefly, I don't want to go too deep into that.
Sure.
But this idea of what if we could turn cattle into kangaroos in terms of their efficiency? Tell me more about where that idea truly came from. Like, was that you and your brother, kind of kicking ideas around? Was it, I know you've got a number of co-founders in the business. Where did the actual idea come from?
So in 2015, one of our business partners, Robert Bell, attended a conference in Queensland. And at that conference, Professor Athol Cleve from the University of Queensland stood up. Now, this man's been studying kangaroos or macropods his entire professional life. And at that conference, in front of a whole lot of farmers, he turned around and said, do you know kangaroos don't burp methane? And Rob at that time was our nutritionist to our feed yards. And the next week he came home and he said, have you ever heard this? And I went, I've lived with these animals all my life. I did not know that. And that really, I then turned around and said, look, there's actually a business in that because this is about methane. This is about sustainability. And over the course of around about 6 months, we met the good professor at his university. At that stage, that technology was stranded science, and ProAgni was formed, licensed that science, and, well, the rest is history.
And so, Warren, how did you come into the business from, M&A, and you've got your lawyer hat on and you decide methane sounds fun?
So I've this is going to date us a little bit, Maureen, but Lachlan and I have known each other for over 55 years.
Mm.
And while I lived that very urban city life, and Locke eventually went back to the farm, we've always kept in touch. As he got more interested in this kind of project and this technology, the phone would often ring with, do you reckon there's enough here for us to set up a company? And then there'd be questions about IP or something like that. And then as it progressed and gained momentum, it just made sense to come into the business, initially a couple of days a week and, for many years now, full time. And, for me, it gave me an opportunity to learn something new, do something different, and contribute something in an important and meaningful business.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And that's exactly why I ask people about their backgrounds too, because like I said, there's this wild trajectory that like leads people to a place together, right? That if Warren, you realized your crystal ball that you looked at 20 years ago said that you'd be working in agriculture and methane, I'm sure you would have
Yeah,
said this can't be my
and
crystal
you know
ball.
that and that old model where you kind of started a job at 17 and then you leave 50 years later with a gold watch, it's just gone. And good.
Yeah, right.
And good.
Yeah. I do think that that's a bit more common still in the States in legal. I worked at a law firm for 5 years and many of them had been there for 45 years and the
Right.
newcomers planned to be there for equally as long, and so I think in that part of the
Well,
industry there is
the
still
the,
some
sec- the
longevity.
secret is that most of them can't do anything else.
They don't have a friend starting a crazy methane agriculture startup,
Yeah,
huh?
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
What was he thinking? Yeah.
So, all right. So you decided on this idea. You decide that you're gonna move forward with it. How did you bring the other co-founders in? Like, what was the determination there in terms of the formation of the various co-founders all coming in together?
Well, there's another fun fact to this, apart from kangaroos not burping methane, is the issue of antibiotic use as growth promotants in our feeding systems. So we're sitting there around about, I guess, February 2016 and going, okay, so we've got an issue with methane. We have an issue with the fact that we feed antibiotics on a daily basis that could and do contribute to the issue of antimicrobial resistance, AMR. So we're about to lose our social license. And in Australia, that's actually quite interesting because we use the word social license with a pretty frequent, almost offhanded use. In Australia, what that actually means is losing access to markets. We export 80% of most things we grow: dairy, wool, beef, and lamb. So when our customer says no, that's actually an in-time real risk. So the challenge for the company was really around the fact that, well, you've got this social license issue, but you're not going to see adoption. Farmers don't have the margins to take risk. They don't have the bandwidth to turn around and go, well, this is about the greater good. They're trying to, they start at the beginning of the day and they work towards the end of the day and go, well, I hope I can do 2 jobs at once. And that's usually the frequent thinking. But they're also commodity-based businesses. So when the supply chain said, look, we can't take your lamb, we can't take your beef because you're feeding them with antibiotics and your carbon footprint's really high, we're going to go and get them from somewhere else. That's actually a black swan event. So we placed a bet on that. And it quickly became, we understood very quickly that the rate of that adoption of any type of technology would really be around providing the primary beneficiary an independent economic value proposition. That is, if you can't make them money, it doesn't matter what the rest of the supply chain does. So, and then the second part of that puzzle was, how do you do that and not disrupt behaviour? How do you actually come in and provide a product that looks and sounds and is pretty much the same price as what you were using on a Monday, and ensure that adoption works and the animals are safe? And we're talking about vitamin and mineral premixes in yards to begin with. So the part of any feeding ration requires those in a feed yard. So that's where we started the business. And so we took our first products to one of our local stores about 50 miles west of where I am, went up to one of the resellers, and that's how we sell in Australia, through retail. So that's where most farmers buy their produce or product from. And they've come in, and we've gone into that store and went, we'd like you to do us a favour. We'd like you to range a bag of Protect and see how it goes. And we didn't talk about social license. We didn't talk about antibiotics. Warren's got a really lovely lens on this. We want you to range it because it's part of a diet they'll need, and tell us how it goes. Well, in the first 6 months, during one of the worst droughts we'd had in the last 100 years, that product flew off the shelf. So we went from one store in Australia with no one knowing us to national distribution and manufacturing. So that sounds...
And why
very
did that happen? Why did it get so much traction?
Because at the end of the day, so we started with sheep, and sheep in feed yards have a much shorter stock turn. So these guys were selling their animals far faster. They were getting to target weight much faster with using ProAgni's products than our competitors. That was the primary driver. So we effectively made them more money. It was what we call lower cost of gain. Now, that really started to amp up towards the end of 2016 as a result of that.
So before you move on from that, though, you have to get the first sale. You have to get the sale first, right? So there's no question that it works. There's no question you're saving the farmer money, that, you've got the efficiency in the feeding and everything like that. But you've got to get the farmer to change it first. How did that happen?
Well, here comes the risk. We went round to all our next door neighbours who were feeding at the time and said, we'd like you to buy this product through these stores. And so I've gone to, we basically, Rob and myself in particular, who effectively live in this community, turned around and said, look, to our customers and our clients, at this time I was still a consultant, and said, try this. Just do us a favour and try this. And if it hadn't have worked, we wouldn't have got a beer within 200 miles, including my brother. So he was just as cranky about having to switch across from products. This better work, Lock, was the response. Yeah. And interestingly enough, some of those customers have gone on to become investors. They were so delighted with the performance.
Wow, that's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more about. I like to focus on like a high moment and a low moment. So I'd love one of those from each of you. A high moment and a low moment from the time you opened your doors to now.
I've got a great one, and it's related to what Lachlan was talking about before, and it's both moments rolled up all in one. So Lachlan's loaded up the truck and driven to this rural supply store, and they've sold $1 million worth of product. So I go, and I'm still in full investment banker mode here. I go, gee, this is interesting. I'm going to go up there and take a look. So I go up to Dubbo, New South Wales. Now, Dubbo, New South Wales kind of, it makes Syracuse look like a metropolis. And
it makes Syracuse, New York look like a metropolis?
Yeah.
Wow.
And or even Binghamton. And I'm kind of, I'm so amped to find out why this product is selling. And I found the sales manager, a guy called Donnie Hagens, and I'm sticking out like a sore thumb here. I'm probably wearing a coat and tie. I'm just looking kind of ridiculous. And I go, Donnie, it's so exciting that this antibiotic-free story is really resonating here. And he looks at me like I'm insane. And he goes, they're buying it because it works. Now, what was really interesting about that is in that moment, I felt more deflated than I can possibly tell you, because I'm kind of going, so our whole reason we get up in the morning isn't working. But then maybe 2 days later, it sunk in that that's exactly what success looks like. If you can get them to buy the product because it's good for them, and irrespective of the fact that it reduces methane and has no antibiotics and everything else, that is exactly what success looks like. So, in that 2 day period, I went from this kind of almost existential crisis of why have I chucked my lot in here because no one cares,
Sure.
to going, wow, this might actually just work. So there's a 2-in-1 for you.
Yeah, I love it. Right, because if your primary messaging points are not resonating and they're only buying it because it works, then it's how do you scale? How do you go into new markets? Right? How do you continue to bring in new customers, which is the fear.
Yeah, and what we found over time is, without being vaguely duplicitous about it, there are different audiences that are interested in different parts of your story. So,
right.
if you're talking to a meat processor who mainly exports to Europe, which has banned the use of most antibiotics, the thing they want to talk about is antibiotics. If you're talking about a guy in a small to medium-sized farm who just wants to get by, what that person needs is production efficiency. Now, sometimes those things cross over, and we have had customers literally go, thank God you got me onto this antibiotic thing, because my meat processor only buys antibiotic-free now. Now, at the time, that never crossed their mind. At the time, all they were buying was the feed efficiency. And yet what happened along the way is it future-proofed their business. And, that's a pretty good day at the office.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Lach?
2 for 1. In October 22, which was a pretty big month for us for 2 reasons. I was presenting at a farmer conference in northern New South Wales, and ProAgni were part of a guest speaker list. The lead speaker in that day was was a buyer from one of the largest lamb packers in Australia. So that company processes 25,000 lambs a day.
Wow.
And this guy's name's Andrew Jackson, but no one calls him Andrew or Jacko. They actually call him the House. And he's a big guy. He's about 6'5". He's about 65. And it's not because he's a big guy. He's called the House because the House always wins. So from a commodity-based point of view, what he says goes. So we take the price he gives us and we're selling our lamb. He stands up there and he says, as of today, my company will be sourcing 80% of all its lamb antibiotic and ionophore free. And he then pointed to ProAgni and said, and here's ProAgni to explain what I just said, and walked off stage. Now, at that moment, there was this just deathly silence across the room, because at that moment, the farmer's customer had just said no. And the second thing that happened was most of the room turned around and said, what is an ionophore?
Right.
So there was this holy smokes moment. So the highlight for us was in that point in time, we just had product market fit. So we were.
The other thing about that too, you had product market fit from somebody else talking about you, which is way stronger, right, than you saying, "I've got this solution."
Yeah. Here's your problem. Here's our solution. We didn't need to do any of that. So then Warren and I jumped on a plane, and here comes the 2 for 1. We then stood up at Grow New York, and for an Australian, this is a really pivotal moment. So you're talking about one of the largest and most prestigious agricultural pitching competitions in the world, virtually invitation only. 20 get through. It's run by the state of. It's funded by the state of New York and run by Cornell University. And first prize is $1 million, and ProAgni won. Now, we're the only Australian company to ever have achieved that. And that piece of social capital is just been extraordinary. So, for me, it's validation of we've got something very special here. We are unique. The technology's unique, and we're delivering.
So exciting. What a time. October, November, because Grow New York Awards are in November. So that was bang, bang, one after the other. You're on this high.
On the plane.
Oh, my God. So go ahead.
I remember after the presentation at this conference in New South Wales, Rob Bell and I were both in the room, and we went, we should have recorded that. Anyway, Warren and I were due to fly out 2 weeks later to join the competition. And it was the first phone call I made because we didn't have a lot of phone coverage. And I said, "Hey, Warren, you've got to hear this. You've just got to hear this." And I think that was, for me, the inflection point. Well, this is going to work. We've actually got a chance at this competition.
Yeah. And so, Warren, you pitched for Grow New York in October or November of 2022. Talk about that a little bit. What was that experience like?
It's a super interesting experience. I mean, the competition is extremely well run. It provided us, before we even turned up, with the opportunity to embed deeply in that New York market. So, and we took that opportunity, even though it was difficult for us, needless to say. So, Lachlan had spent a lot of time on the ground, meeting producers there, spending time with the people who ran the competition, and really making the use of that time. So that investment was super worthwhile. The competition was, completely professionally well run. I mean, it's kind of like, the Olympics of pitching competitions. And I mean, it was just a great experience. It was just a great experience. One for which we will remain grateful. It was completely awesome.
Yeah. The easiest way to explain it back in my hometown is it's the US Tennis Open.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone to Flushing Meadow and we've actually come back with the trophy.
And with the top prize. Yeah.
Yeah, and Aussies get that.
Right. Yep. I only understand that because I read Carrie Soto Was Back, which was a fantastic book about tennis. I'm not a tennis gal, but it was a fantastic book. So I don't want to gloss over. There's two things I don't want to miss. And so one is the science, which we really haven't talked about a lot. And so I want to give you an opportunity to speak to that a little bit. And then I'd also love for one of you to talk about the investment landscape, because there's been some reference to the fact that you've brought in some investors, you're seeking continued investment, I believe. And so I'd love for somebody to address the current landscape.
Why don't I take the science thing first, because there's a neat segue back to Grow New York. So one of the things that happens in the Grow New York competition is you get a kind of pitch mentor. And I come up with the first version of the pitch, and it's about half science. And he just kind of grumpily looks at it and goes, "Take all that out." And I kind of go, "No." And and kind of, a degree of tension ensues, frankly. Then it gets whittled back to one slide eventually. He's grumpy that there was even one slide left. I'm grumpy that the other 6 got taken out. And guess what? He was right.
It worked out. Yeah, right.
It worked out. But the core of it is basically this, that humans digest their food, and it's a physical process involving enzymes and everything else. And ruminant animals, cattle and sheep, don't. They basically chew up grass, they put it into their stomach, which is like a big ass holding tank, and they ferment it.
Mm-hmm.
And they ferment it through the same process that makes sauerkraut or makes beer. But here's the thing. We say the cows ferment the food. Well, that's not actually true. Literally billions and billions of bacteria and other microbes do the fermentation. And without those microbes, there would be no food produced by the animal, no food produced for the animal. And here's a super fun fact. Those bugs create about 100% of the methane that creates the methane from ruminant problem. So all of our science is based around the simple principle that if we look after that bacterial population will look after animals and the environment. So everything we do, weirdly, is about feeding and nurturing that microbial population and kind of ignoring the cow. Because that microbial population is humming, they look after the animal. And
Right.
that's the core of the science. And then it comes down to promoting the bugs that we want, discouraging the ones that we don't. And here is the ultimate scientific proof point that works. We recently did a large study where we were doing PCR analysis of that ruminal microbiome. So, what were the actual bugs? And there was a control group and a group being fed Protect. There were 4 times as many unique species of bacteria in the group being fed Protect. So we have promoted that microbial biodiversity, and that microbial biodiversity completely works. And then you kind of step back and you go, wow, that's pretty cool. How did you do that? And step 1 of that is not actually that complicated. We didn't feed antibiotics, because guess what antibiotics do?
Right.
They kill bacteria.
Kill the bugs.
They kill the
Right.
bugs. They kill the very bugs that the animal is looking upon to thrive. So that is kind of the shortest and most interesting version of the science story, I think. And my old Grow New York pitch coach probably would have shouted at me and said that was too long.
Hey, Brad, I know you worked with Brad Goldthorpe. And he's a very smart guy, and clearly gave you great advice.
Yeah. Yep.
I think he's 3 from 4, isn't he? In the pitching comp in terms of mentoring.
So we're headed into year 5, right? I believe. Yeah. He's had at least 2, I believe. $1 million winners. Agency 29 has had at least 1 winner every single year since the competition started for Grow New York.
He's soft. He's a bit of a minimalist when it comes to communication, and those one-liners. For my colleague here, who's a professional communicator, turns around and goes, "It's just driving me mad." But I mean, in the world of presenting, if you're going to present a line of horses, you need a rhino, and I think the kangaroo's really that really unique story.
Yeah. And so what's the connection there? Like, bridge that gap for me. Do kangaroos also have little bugs that help them digest? Like, what's the bridge?
Yeah, so that is also super interesting. So they are not ruminants, needless to say, but they are foregut fermenters. So they use exactly the same process of ingesting grass and then bacteria fermenting that to provide energy for them. The bacterial population, though, is quite different, and it's just much more efficient. Now, and here's the super interesting bit. Many of the same bacteria are found in cattle and kangaroos. They're just in smaller numbers in cattle. And they can actually transfer species between animals. So in Australia, cattle and kangaroos sharing a drinking trough will actually transfer some of those species and make cattle in that environment more efficient. So
interesting.
So we could keep flogging what kind of started as an analogy and an idea to death, and what we're actually finding is there's more truth and wisdom in it than we possibly thought when we started.
Yeah, that's great. Let's go to the investment landscape. And then I've got one more question for you about what's next, and then we'll wrap up. But there's been a lot of discussion in every major ag conference that I go to, especially those where startups are in the audience, that the ag investment landscape is atrocious right now and incredibly difficult. So what's your perspective on that?
Can I lead off on that, and then I might throw to Lachlan, because Lachlan's kind of at the coalface of that, and has some really, I think, pertinent observations on it. The fact that it's not a great landscape is 100% true. I mean, vast amounts of money got set on fire in artificial protein and vertical farming. And unless the money comes back, it doesn't kind of go round. It's ironic that for us, who are basically trying to optimize what's more or less the existing food system, so much money got hosed trying to create a new one.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of interesting and ironic for us. But I guess what we're
So you
seeing...
think that approach has not only eaten up a lot of the ag tech capital that was out there, but has also perhaps made investors skittish on continuing to invest in the industry?
I think it has, although, the lesson to be learned from that is you don't change consumer behavior overnight. You don't change a very complicated food production system overnight. And yet the problems that they were trying to solve still exist. Now, enter stage right ProAgni, who is not trying to change consumer behavior, who is not trying to change the food system overnight, and is trying to find meaningful and cost-effective ways to address the same problems that vertical farming and artificial meat were trying to solve. And those problems still exist.
Right.
They were just stupid solutions. So that kind of core narrative is still very much there. A lot of that money got set on fire, but the problem is still there, and that problem still needs to be solved. So like what are you seeing kind of out there knocking on doors? And we split up the knocking on doors task. It's just Locke is better at it than I am. He just is.
Well, I think when we first started, startups are startups. They're always in capital raise mode at some level, right? I think one of the things that really appealed to both our current investors and the investors that we're speaking to is that when we first started, we were solving a problem that the industry did not know it had. We knew that it was going to turn up. Well, we placed a bet on that. And in that moment, we had to do two things really elegantly. We had to be able to be scalable, and we had to have application across jurisdictions that allowed us to do that scaling without the regulatory compliance. I mean, the products we're talking about here are actually on the GRAS list. So the original investor foundation came from high net worth family and friends who went, this is really unique. And then from customers who've gone, hang on a minute, can we actually be part of this process as well? We'd love to follow and be part of this journey. And that is, you're solving a problem for us we know that works. And then that story became amplified. And it still is a methodology that works. So, we're in a conversation with a really large feed yard who we did some trials with. Actually, it's not a conversation anymore. They've committed to investing. Who've done a really large trial with us and went, hang on a minute, I'm looking at these numbers. These are unique. So investment in our world is really about strategics who amplify what we do and where we do it. But it's also the congruency of the story. At the end of the day, if you can't deliver what the customer's seeking in the right way, at the right time, because they're not going to ask you about the science. They just want to know, is it going to kill my animals? And is it going to make me money? So you've got to tick those two boxes. So my preference has always been to raise money within the industry because the industry has domain experience. It understands that this has got to be these solutions. A, there's no silver bullet. B, they're very complex to solve. You're dealing with a system solution, which is what ProAgni brings here, to a systems problem. This is just not only about taking out methane and removing antibiotics. This is about providing value right through that supply chain. So in essence, that's where the greater draw of most of our investments coming from.
Yep. Makes sense.
And related to that, I'd kind of add that Locke and I sometimes joke about this, and it is an exaggeration. But it is also true that if we have to start a pitch by explaining what a feed conversion ratio is,
yeah,
we are probably wasting our time.
We're in the wrong room.
Wrong room. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great point. All right. What's next? What's next for ProAgni? What can you talk about in terms of some of what's coming down the pike?
It's really, I guess, taking the win from Grow New York and using that social capital to. We're already working with customers in the US. We're already working with significant influencers in that supply chain to actually start the process of those trials. And we've got feed yards who are currently purchasing Protect as it is. But it's really using that social capital from Cornell to create that beachhead in the United States. So the last 12 months has been going out, understanding, just by way of an example, or it's probably easy to understand this way, Australia is not a smaller version of the United States protein market. It has some very significant differences, and we've needed to spend at least 14 months, or the better part of the time spent since Grow New York was won, understanding that market and understanding those customer needs. So, and that'll never finish, but it's probably been the best use of our time.
And I think another part of it, particularly in the US, is a lot of the corporates involved in the food supply chain, from the quick service restaurants to the meat processors. There's a lot of pressure on them to try and solve some of these environmental issues. I think they've been told that they can't be solved without great economic cost. And I think that, a lot of our next year looks like working with those guys to try and help them solve the problems they want to solve without putting a burden on their supplier, the farmer. And
right, tell a different story. It can be possible.
That is exactly right. And working with those guys, they buy a lot of meat. They buy a lot of meat and milk. And while it's one conversation with a very long sales cycle, the net output of that conversation is kind of potentially game changing. So, part of it is knocking on farm doors, and we'll have some little trials coming up in New York that came out of knocking on farm doors. But a lot of it is also trying to get that pull through go. And it comes back
at the end of the day, you can't make it.
When the customer says no, the game changes. So we're beginning to work with the customer.
You can't make a hamburger more expensive. You just don't do it. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
The solutions have got to be about affordable, abundant protein.
Yep. Affordable abundance.
Yeah. And what I've always loved, about ProAgni's solution too, is that it keeps the farmer first, right? It is the solution with the farmer in mind, that doesn't sacrifice the farmer. Whereas I was at World Agritech in San Francisco in March, and the majority of the conversation was about regenerative agriculture and sustainability and climate change, and how do we incorporate those into what the farmer is doing. And yet the farmer was not part of the conversation, right? And so everyone understands that the farmer cannot spend more to farm. The farmer cannot be paid less. In fairness, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the United States can provide subsidies, through USDA and other agricultural programs that support the farmer trying these new initiatives. But what they're looking for is exactly what you have: tried and trusted, doesn't cost more, and in fact can actually save you money because of the efficiency that's being created over time, and checks the boxes for future proofing, as you said, Warren, for, the continued growth and success of the farm, so that, going back to the beginning of our conversation, it is something that can be passed down to the next generation and sustainable in the business sense as well as in the economic sense.
And that, I think, is the key point here, that sometimes the sustainability debate leaves off one of the legs of that stool, which is economic sustainability.
Right.
And unless it's economically sustainable, the rest is going to be really, really tough work. Really tough work.
Yep, exactly.
Because, the same person who cares deeply about the pandas and the environment doesn't want the price of milk to double, and doesn't want the price of a burger to double, and doesn't want, farms to turn into parking lots because there's not a living in farming anymore. We've got to get all of this right. And I think that one of the keys with ProAgni has been, because it has always been so farmer-centric, we really work on the premise that unless we can get the economics right first, we almost don't have a right to talk about the other stuff yet.
I mean, the three of the four founders are farmers, so we started with the end in mind.
Right.
18 years of consultancy. Ask a farmer to define sustainability. It's a completely different frame of reference.
Right. You're absolutely right. It is. Thank you both for joining me today. I appreciate you talking about your backgrounds and more about the in-depth components of the ProAgni story that I wasn't aware of. I thought it was great to hear some of that from you. Our listeners can learn more about ProAgni at proagni.com, and stay tuned for future episodes. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you for listening to Spilled Salt. I'm your host, Maureen Ballatori. Spilled Salt is an Agency 29 production. Agency 29 is a brand-building firm for food, beverage, and agriculture brands. Learn more at agency29.com. For more information about the podcast, visit spilledsaltpodcast.com. Use that website to send me questions or recommendations for future guests. I always love hearing from you. Spilled Salt is available anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. Please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.